Okay.
All right.
Sure.
So thank you all for being with us. And this event is organized by the Department of English and Humanities, Brac School of Humanities and Social Sciences. And unfortunately, Firdaus Azim ma'am, our chairperson, is in a meeting, so she could not join. So she apologized. But along with literature and ELT events, we do organize webinars and seminars on the theme of education. And it's my honor to invite Dr. Urmee Chakma to our department. And I thank her heartily for agreeing with the timing, because it's late night there, but she agreed. So I'm grateful for that. It's very difficult, I know. So let me share the abstract with you first, and then we can begin the talk. That will be easier for everyone to follow. And the title of the event today is Empowerment and Subalternizing Voices Through Education, a case study of diasporic indigenous Chakma in Melbourne. And the abstract is, this study is critical investigation into how the Chakma, a small indigenous community from the Chittagong Hill Tracts in Bangladesh, have utilized educational affordances to migrate to a developed country, Australia, and what role these educational affordances have played in their attempts at retaining, promoting, and enriching their ethnic Chakma identity after immigration. Recognizing that Western, predominantly Anglophone European theories and dominant epistemologies are often inadequate in understanding issues of assimilation and integration in diaspora for minorities, the research heavily draws on theorists from the global South, particularly on selected aspects of work from Cuisino, Spivak, and Kabir, to problematize how one group of ethnic people experience being twice minoritized in diaspora, yet also create unique spaces for growth rather than assimilation. The use of these theories was a deliberate choice that allowed a nuanced understanding of the complexities embedded within the lived experience of these ethnic minorities. Minorities' oppressed status, indigeneity, and subalternity. The findings point to the dynamic shifting of idiocentric position of Chakmas, and that are dictated not just by historical discourses of subjugation and dominant discourses of powerful groups, but also by their own intellectual, philosophical, and moral metamorphosis over time. In this process, they find a strong voice to criticize the Bangladeshi nation state's colonial mindset in treating its minority communities. Their practices of cultural maintenance, both individually and communally, show greater awareness of maintaining and preserving culture, identity, religion, and overall Chakmaness. Our speaker, Dr. Urmee Chakma, is currently working as a teaching and research associate at the Faculty of Education, Monash University, Australia. She has been an educator for 15 years, having taught at several language institutes and universities in Australia. Her area of research interest include education for indigenous people, diasporic communities, culture and identity, citizenship studies, power, and social justice. So I would request Dr. Urmee Chakma to begin her presentation.
Thank you, Sabrina. So I will start sharing my screen. Let's see. And share. Okay, is it working? Can you see? I won't share full screen, Sabrina, because I have some notes to read.
Okay, yeah.
That's all right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, good evening, everyone. As we were talking about, just before I start, I can see that Kavita is trying to enter. Can you please? Yes, thank you. Yes, good evening, everyone. As I was saying, it's 10:44, nearly 11:15, but it's all good. First, I would like to thank Brac University School of Humanities and Social Sciences for inviting me to share my experience. I thank Professor Feddos Azim Appa, the chairperson of English and Humanities. Although she's not here, I still wanted to thank her. Thank you everyone in the audience for joining, and to those who have joined from many countries, as we were hearing, you know, from the States, from Indonesia, from Malaysia, and from Sydney, my friends. And I just saw Kavita entering. Thank you very much, Amin Bhai and everyone. And special thanks to Dr. Sabrina for organizing this event. And this is what I'm calling my presentation tonight. Coloniality and Diaspora, Autoethnography of a Minority. And in the on the slide here, you can see me with my twin daughters wearing a traditional Chakma dress or costume, Pinon Hadi. Okay, so this is an Australian tradition to start any presentation with an acknowledgement of country. This recognizes the original owners of the land long before it became a settler colony. This, of course, is even more relevant given my topic tonight. So I pay my respects to the peoples of the Kulin nations on whose traditional states I am on today, to their ancestors and to the children who we are educating into the future. I also acknowledge other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also acknowledge the lands of other Indigenous peoples where participants are living and working around the world, and pay my respects to them. Now, before I start, looking at the the audience and who have joined here, I just wanted to, before I officially start my my presentation, I wanted to say a few things. I know that I'm here invited as a kind of successful person to some extent, and that's why Sabrina, after hearing my PhD, invited me. I'm quite hesitant to label myself to this criteria, actually, because there are many people from Dhaka University English department, because that's my original background, that I'm friends with, that I know of personally, who are doing very meaningful jobs as high school or college teachers, who are contributing a lot to their students. So in a way, I'm humbled, honored that I've been invited, but at the same time, I want to acknowledge that I have had many privileges, starting from having graduated from Dhaka University English department, a top university, a top department, and having studied at Monash University, again, a top university in Australia and in the world. Of course, I worked very hard, and I will share my experience working hard to have come this far, but nevertheless, I know that I'm privileged in many ways. So having said that, let's start. So today's presentation is basically my life story, and that's why I call it autoethnography. Me growing up from Maishuri to Kagratchuri, and eventually to coming to Melbourne. I will share how I've come to Australia, and in the process, how I research what I've found out, and how that has not only improved my understanding, but also has made me look at the world in more complex ways. I'll also go back to the 90s when I was a student at Dhaka University, even before that, just to show my intellectual metamorphosis, things that I was very naive about. And I believe a lot of us still are naive about many things. So essentially, this is going to be a story of me, by me, but of course I will refer to theories when I talk about my PhD journey and what theories I've used. So it's not so much to tell you what my thesis is about, but just to give you an alternative way of looking at the world through the eyes of minorities. If you are a Bengali male, a Bengali man, a Muslim Bengali man, I should say, as many of you are here, living in Bangladesh today, you may never have experienced what it means to be a minority. You are privileged. So I'm speaking as a Bangladeshi, but not as a Bengali. Bangladeshi, but not a Bengali. I'm Chakma, that's my ethnicity. So I'm speaking as a woman, as someone who grew up outside of Dhaka, and I'm speaking as someone who has gone through many experiences, both good and bad, like everyone else, but perhaps as I'm a Chakma woman, my experiences are different in certain ways and have been different in certain ways. And I'm also speaking as someone who still identifies as a Bangladeshi, naturalized Australian, but as a Bangladeshi. So let's have a look at the age of innocence in William Blake's world, where ignorance was a bliss. And this is what I'm calling ignorance is bliss. As you can see, this is me. I was about 2 to 3 years old here. My sister Sinora is here. She would remember this family picture. I was born at a village called Maishchuri and I spent the first 6 years of my life there. And I'm the eldest of 3 sisters. I'm actually feeling really happy and emotional in a sense that my own sister, she's here. So I grew up at a time when Chittagong Hill Tracts was under a military regime. As you might know, the fights between the Shanti Bahini and the Bangladesh military. One of my very earliest memories that I still remember is lying under a temporarily made shack from banana leaves with other types of leaves somewhere in the jungle with heavy rain. And when I think about it, now I feel cold because that's my memory. And the little children around me were being shushed by their mothers so that they couldn't make noises. Otherwise, the army will find us. Why we were there? It was a common scenario to flee our home. I'm talking about in the 70s, early 70s, or mid 70s. It was a common scenario to flee our home with always ready, always packed bags, especially at night, to take shelter in the jungle because the army would come to raid villages, almost like what you see in a zombie apocalypse movie from Hollywood. The army would raid, searching for Shanti Bahini, and young girls, young women, and young men would flee. Girls were scared of being raped or molested. Young men were scared of being arrested. They were perceived to be somehow connected, to Shanti Bahini or perceived as Shanti Bahini supporters. So my grandmother would stay home as a paharadar, because she was old. So, but remember though, although we have got this Shanti Chukti and the peace accord and everything, the CHT, the whole region is still under heavy military surveillance, heavy military presence. I never knew how dangerous it was or how much my parents suffered or worried. So because of all these commotions, ongoing commotions, my parents decided to leave Maishchuri and move to Khagrachuri. So I started my primary school there, and much later in 1986, I was about 13 or 14 years old. Our village and the neighboring villages were burned in Khagrachuri by the Bengali settlers. And this time we had to flee to Dhaka. And this was my first visit to Dhaka. I fled there with my mother, with my sister. My sister is here. She remembers, we often talk about this. And we missed school for about a month. And, but I completed my SSC from Kagerachi Government High School, and then I went to Dhaka to complete my HSC, and I did that from Eden College, and then I got admitted. Admitted at Dhaka University. These pictures represent my education trajectory from I say, hilly Pahari girl to becoming now, as I'm being referred as Dr. Chakma, Dr. Urmee Chakma. There's three pictures. On the very left, I'm in front of Kuwait Mutri Hall. Very memorable memories, fantastic memories. My friend Aisha Siddiqa Lipi is here. You know the story. And on the far right, you can see this is our graduation photo after our masters, and you can probably see some of the familiar faces there. And Fami, I can see you. And of course, the only man jumping, you know who he is. And the middle picture is with my PhD supervisors. So, getting enrolled at English department, Dhaka University, was a turning point because it was a dream come true for me. English department was connected to certain prestige, good job prospects, being kind of referred as intelligent, brilliant, and so and so. But it was also a confusing time for me. Why? Because, I never really felt like I quite belong there. I was still trying to come to terms with how I was perceived in many ways. My looks, my accent, the way I spoke Bengali or Bangla, still trying to master Bangla, my second language. So if my teachers are here, they might remember, speaking in English in front of everyone in class was really terrifying for me. But somehow I managed to pass with a good second class. Not as good as Pompey, who is here, but I managed. This is also the time that I became aware of many discriminatory practices that I would experience, starting from the Chakmas here present today. They would be able to connect with my experiences. Being called out names like, I still remember, whenever I was on a rickshaw, I would be called names like, Oi Chakma, Chinku, Chinese, Oi Upojati, and all these derogatory names and terms, or even being asked whether we ate snakes and frogs, raw meat, and so on. And these are still going on. I see these, posts on Facebook, on social media. I was even asked jokingly by some of my Bengali friends, jokingly, of course, whether I could see everything that they could see because my eyes were smaller. But also I have so many good memories, particularly at Mutri Hall, why I think it was because almost all the girls at Mutri Hall were from Mofosol, outside Dhaka. I could connect with them. And that's where I felt like I belonged to some extent. I also became politically involved with Healed Women Federation at this time, kind of, fighting for the rights for Hilly women. And still I was very naive about a lot of things. I just kind of understood some of the things. And after I completed my master's, about 2 years later, I got awarded with Auset Scholarship. And that's the first time that I came to Monash to study. And finally doing my PhD. So this was my life story to give you the context against which I will present my PhD thesis next. And then move on to the theories. So from the next slide, I will switch over to my doctoral journey and my theoretical understanding and positioning and how I have used theories in my thesis. So this is the title of my thesis, and this is the overarching main research question. I investigated, just to give a brief description of my thesis. I'm not going to talk about it in detail. I investigated how a group of indigenous Chakmas make their way into Australia. I particularly looked at the diasporic Chakma community in Melbourne, how they used education as a resource, as a tool, as an affordance to change their lives both across space and time. These two concepts, space and time, are very important in my thesis. So in other words, spatiality and temporality are more complex concepts than the way we commonly think about them. For example, time is not necessarily linear, as I will explain later. So in my thesis, the way I understood is across space means geographically from Bangladesh to Dhaka to Australia, as like me and my participants, and across time means intergenerationally, how they pass on their values, culture, language to the next generation through cultural, religious practices, and the role of education in all of it. Now, I had 7 participants, 2 rounds of interviews, and a focus group discussion. I also interviewed the Chakma Raja, Raja Devashish Roy in his residence in Rangamati. I also analyzed some documents, and I have had numerous, conversations with my father, Professor Chakma. So my study found that, I know Sabrina said a little bit about it from the abstract. My study found that aside from the obvious results of being empowered because of education, as we know that education, empowers us many ways, but then empowerment is also a contested term. So we are not going to talk about that tonight, but as you would know. So it is actually education, not money or landed property, especially in the case of minorities, that gives my participants that criticality, the critical stance to re-evaluate and reconfigure their positions in the Chakma society, both in Bangladesh and Australia, and to an extent globally, because of the changed geographies. This has resulted in better understanding of their lives and the role of education in all of it, particularly to critique Bangladeshi government's oppressive, discriminative attitudes towards its minorities and the violation of human rights. I used post-colonial critical theories such as Quijano, Spivak, Kabir, Bhabha, in order to understand how these things are enacted in their lives. Well, I could spend probably the whole hour talking about my thesis, but I will move on to why we are here tonight. As you know, I got conferred just about 4 months ago, so I'm still, a lot of things are very fresh in my memory about my PhD. You can see there are some questions, some difficult questions to start with. Locating the self, as you do at the beginning when you study your PhD. The first challenge for me was to locate myself. All the identities, as you can see, how do I, see myself? Am I an Australian Bangladeshi, Bangladeshi Australian, Chakma Australian, Australian Chakma, or just global citizen? So during the process, I was constantly trying to understand my identity. How do I identify? Is it my hybrid identity? Am I, a hybrid identity now? There are so many aspects, values, customs instilled in me because of my gender, my ethnicity, my religion, and I was at a certain age, my educational background, my sexuality, my sexual orientation, and because of my experiences of living Kagratchuri at the age of 16, and then living most of my adult life in Dhaka, and then I moved to Melbourne. I've been living here for a very long time now as well. And then I have been married to a Bengali man. So all this, was a process of understanding myself as much as it was about understanding the participants' accounts of their experiences. And PhD thesis is about, justifying, connecting, discussing your data. Those of you who have done PhD, you would know, data analysis, findings with theories. This is when I started reading more about critical theories, which have always attracted me, particularly post-structuralism, post-colonialism, because they talk about power, power structures, power imbalance that are embedded in our societies. I mean, think about the recent incident with the Hindus in Bangladesh, or the Muslims in India, or what is happening with Uyghurs in China. I know, so these are the power imbalance that we have, the minority, majority, and all sorts of things. And this is also what I realized. The theories represent the predominance of white, Anglo, male privileged voices. I read extensively, as you do. I read Said, Foucault, Stuart Hall, Homi Bhabha, Spivak, Paulo Freire, his banking model of education, pedagogy of the oppressed, so and so. I also intensely read Linda Smith from New Zealand, a pioneer in Indigenous research methodology. Foley in Australia on Indigenous standpoint theory. So alternative voices, as Sabrina mentioned, from the global South, which I'll talk about later, that I came across, much later. So now let's have a look at what we studied at Dhaka University English Department. As I mentioned before, it was a turning point in my life when I started my undergraduate studies in the Department of English, Dhaka University. Things were much simpler then. For example, in my master's year, we had to choose from two options: third world literature and continental literature. Think about it. Third world literature, continental literature, right? We never questioned the terms. Third world, what's the first and the second world then? Continental, which continent? Of course, third world referred to literature from the so-called post-colonial states such as India, and the continent was no other continent but Europe. But why was Bangladesh or India third world? Why was Europe the continent? Our teachers never questioned this, at least not in their lectures, never. I'm not sure if Focusar is here, I can't see. We can probably talk about that later on. Not until later did I ask, who decides what the third world countries are really? So in the following decade, Bangladesh gradually went up the status ladder from third world to least developed country, underdeveloped country, and finally developing country. But who decides? What are the metrics of measurement? Then again, Bangladesh is an overpopulated country. Over what? Who decides when a population is over or under? What is the benchmark, right? So talking about third world, let's see. With the fall of Soviet Union by the middle of the 90s, the world realized that the so-called decolonization of former colonies had failed. The notion of post-colonialism no longer had sufficient explanatory power to account for what was happening in former colonies, or indeed in countries that arguably never had a colonial rule of the type we see in the Indian subcontinent. New power structures started to emerge. In this theoretical vacuum, in Latin America, a new school of colonial studies emerged, which I will talk about later. I know I'm saying that quite a lot. I'll talk about later. But in an increasingly globalized and neoliberalist world climate, international actors such as the World Bank, IMF, donors to developing countries began labeling countries as underdeveloped and or developing. So the third world label was gradually replaced by more politically correct and euphemistic label, developing countries, being PC. So these global actors' ideologies were not just politically strategic, but also based on Eurocentric beliefs of, for example, the nuclear family, parents, one child or two children, hence overpopulated. Under-differentiation and reductive stereotyping led to the logic of defending the exertion of power over poorer states. Let's have a look at critical theories. You can see here Michel Foucault's name and Edward Said's names. I won't go into details about Foucault and Said, but how can I talk about post-colonialism without mentioning these two big names? The branch of critical theories, commonly known as post-colonial theories, actually started with Michel Foucault in the 70s in a more abstract way, because he talks about power, structure, governmentality, archaeology, etc., in a more abstract way. And then on to Edward Said with the publication of Orientalism in 1978, the cover, which you can see now in a more concrete way. Here, he was referring to Palestinian Arabs and how they were constructed or seen by the West. But then we moved on to the 80s through to the 90s. Names like Said, Spivak, and Homi Bhabha loomed large. Coloniality, which I'll explain in the next slide, was not a concept. It did not exist at the time. Was there? Anyway, so Bhabha defied the ruler-ruled binary by proposing the hybrid third space. Spivak, in her own way, pointed to the reification, sorry, a bit of a tongue twister, caused by such binaries, and argued that there were others beyond the binary, the subaltern, who cannot speak, like the Chakma, who aren't located in the British Indian binary until 1947, or in the East Pakistan, West Pakistan binary until 1971. And finally, even post-independence in the Bengali ruled binary. Both of these theorists featured quite prominently in my PhD thesis. Yet I realized something was still missing. As a non-Muslim, non-Bengali Chakma woman, there were several intersections of minoritization I found myself embedded in, growing up in a patriarchal Muslim majority country that continues to be colonized by the Bengalis. What post-colonialism for me? You know, there was no post. Maybe for the Muslim Bengali man, but not for a Buddhist Chakma woman. Right. So in this picture, we only see a reconfiguration of power after the exit of the colonizers. There are still native elite rulers and the native non-elite ruled. So the West Pakistanis take over from the British in 1947, and then the Bengalis take over after independence. The native elites did exactly what the colonizers were doing, but in the name of national sovereignty, Bangladeshi nationalism. What about the Chakmas? You know, what about the other minorities in Bangladesh? Chakmas aren't present in either of the binaries. You can see on the slide. So we needed the subaltern, which post-colonial theories already explained, but there was more. And this is when I stumbled upon the Latin American school of decolonial thinking, or decoloniality, both based on the notion of coloniality rather than colonialism. Post-colonialism didn't have enough explanatory or epistemological power to explain my life story or that of my participants. After I collected data, that's exactly what I realized. I came across Latin American theories such as Miniolo, so that's how we pronounce their names, Miniolo and Quijano. And I really felt like eureka. I mean, this is exactly what I needed to explain my data, what my participants were telling me. So I started learning about coloniality for the first time, which is different from colonialism and post-colonialism. Colonialism generally refers to the economic and political control by the power of Europe from the second half of the 19th century to the years following World War II, the subjugation of one people over another. It mainly started with Christianity and commercial interests with the conquest and colonization of the Americas, and later, of course, expansion into Asia. Quijano made a distinction between coloniality and colonialism. So coloniality, Quijano describes, is the quality of being colonial. In a sense, this is timeless and the eternal condition of the human being, as I will explain in the next slide. Decolonial thought, which is a way of understanding coloniality and the geopolitics of knowledge, a term used by Quijano, refers to an analytic that looks into persistent and, in a way, atemporal class distinctions and social classificatory system that cannot be explained by post-colonialism. So in a nutshell, post-colonialism, one could argue, stemmed from the works of Edward Said with his publication of Orientalism in 1978. He is known as the father of post-colonialism, and then, of course, picked up by Bhabha and Spivak in the Indian tradition, generally interrogating British colonial practices until the World War II, drawing on works of, as you can see here, Marx, Foucault, Derrida, positioning against imperialism and Eurocentrism, etc. The subaltern cannot speak here. Although the frame of post-colonialism allows the possibility of transnational solidarities among the subalterns, they can speak, but only among themselves. So the Chakmas could speak to other minorities, such as the Garos or Marmas or Tripuras, but not to the media, not to the dominant discourses, not to the government, and not certainly to the world. I wanted to give an example here, as you can see, the case of Thailand. Theoretically, you can't use post-colonial theories to explain power structures, oppression, the state of the minorities in Thailand, because it's one of those countries that has never been colonized in the traditional sense. But if you use coloniality, you can. Let's see how. Okay. So the notion of coloniality or decolonial theory, which comes from the Latin American tradition from Mignolo and Quijano that I explained a little while ago, also known as the geopolitics of knowledge, has a notion of time. The main difference between post-colonialism and coloniality is actually the prefix post, which suggests after something. So it has that linear concept of time, moving from colonialism to post-colonialism. Therefore, one can argue you could also have a pre-colonialism then, pre and post. Coloniality suggests there is no such thing as pre and post, because it's all about some of the eternal and perpetual condition of human society. And so the main difference is in time. Coloniality also therefore explains racial and gender hierarchy, which is not a colonial construct, but it was always there. In the notion of coloniality, the subaltern can speak. And to give you a good example, students of literature, you would know about magic realism, which is a literary tradition in the Latin American literature. So if you have read, for example, 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, he narrates the simultaneity of the world of magic and the relatively recent society by juxtaposing fantasy and reality. This shows that time is not necessarily linear, and that is why the subaltern can always speak, because the structure has always been there. So let's have a look at the notion of time a bit more. So as I mentioned, the main difference between post-colonialism and coloniality lies in the concept of time. The notion of post-colonialism involves the traditional linear concept of time, which is European, rather than a universal construct. And I'm not even here, talking about, the Roman or the Caesarean calendar, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, not like that. I'm talking about the linearity and non-linearity of time. And that is where coloniality comes in and fills in that epistemological vacuum that allowed me to understand my own lived experiences as a minority from Bangladesh and my participants' experiences. time can be perceived in different ways, even by the physicists. For example, Einstein talked about space-time as one inseparable entity. Otherwise, we can't explain the Big Bang. So when we talk about post, it means after something, just reiterating. So there has to be something before that. So post-colonialism means a state after colonialism. Arguably, then there could be pre-colonialism. It's a linear concept of time. Coloniality, on the other hand, allows multiple time concepts, the simultaneity of time, which allows, for example, as I mentioned, South American literature, the use of magic realism, excuse me, or Australian Aboriginal people's concept of time and seasons in Aboriginal paintings, such as Dreamtime. So I've been talking about all these abstract concepts. How do we apply these in a real story? For example, when you are writing a paper, let's move on from the abstract to the concrete, and I'll show you Quijano's matrix of power that I've been mentioning, which shows how the notion of coloniality can be applied in a study through 4 domains. So this is Quijano. Quijano uses this theoretical framework called the colonial matrix of power, which is composed of 4 domains. And these are the 4 domains that I used to understand what my participants were telling me, their stories, and help me to connect my data and my experience growing up as a Chakma, a minority woman, as an other person different from the majority. So Quijano warns that the matrix cannot be observed from outside because we are all inside it, always. Hence, the non-linearity of perpetual time, timelessness, you could say, of the human condition. So the 4 domains here, for example, you can see control of economy, which is land appropriation, exploitation of labor, control of natural resources, control of authority, including institution, the army that I started my presentation with, control of gender and sexuality means family and education, and control of knowledge and subjectivity is creating discourses, often negative discourses. So, for example, knowledge about the Chakma in mainstream education system. I'll give you an example of the knowledge, control of knowledge and subjectivity in my next slide because of time restriction. I won't give examples of all the other domains, but I address them. I use them all in my thesis. All right. So, what do you think? Everyone? Can anyone would like to say something?
Ma'am, would you explain which book it is?
Yes. Thank you, Sabrina.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, I just laughed. I know, Kobitadi, we have exchanged a few texts. So this has been going around for some time on social media now. I mean, when I saw this, I went through a number of emotions. First of all, it was extremely funny. If you look at this, and then it was very upsetting, disappointing, and I got angry. So different emotions. So this is an example of control through knowledge and subjectivity that I was talking about, which is one of the 4 domains in Quijano's matrix of power. So Sabrina, this is on page 255 of the book called Easy Plus Series for National University for 4th year Bachelor of Science Botany subject. The author is a lecturer from Government Titumir College, known to be an author of numerous books, claims that. So those of you like truly, and some of you don't read Bangla or Bengali, this is the circled part here. It asks, what is Chakma staple food? And the answer is bhat or mod. It means rice and alcohol. So that's what it says. Our staple food is rice and alcohol. I mean, come on, you know, who eats rice with alcohol? Can it be, you know, staple food? This is ridiculous. Even before that, if you look at this here, Chakmader কোন ধরনের বিয়ে প্রচলিত, cross cousin বিবাহ প্রচলিত. Cross cousin marriage, I'm not even sure that it's a word or it's a term. It's not part of our tradition. It's wrong. And it's, if I'm not wrong, it's probably more common among Bengalis. I mean, if just to look at this page, Garo upojatira kothaye bash kore. Come on, people are still calling us upojati. Well, is this what we're teaching, you know, our kids today? Is it what we're teaching? Imagine what kind of generation we are bringing up when we have unregulated textbooks, texts like this available to today's learners. This is the kind of Orientalist view that is founded on the exoticization of the minority through discourses that are embedded in and promoted through the curriculum and textbooks like this. I mean, you can probably hear from my voice, you know, if I'm really feeling angry about it. This is ridiculous, but this is what you see. Oh, well, let's move on. All right, so this is I'm nearly done. What you are looking at here is the result of the blood, the sweat, tears of 4 years, sleepless nights, lots of anxieties. I got some gray hairs, I lost some hair, my theoretical framework in my PhD thesis. And this is a visualization of how I combined the theories of both post-colonialism and coloniality in an integrated manner in my thesis. So there are two coordinates of time and space that I've been talking about, and that's why I had to, you know, talk about time and space. So here, time and space here. So at the top, you can see the linearity of colonialism moving on from, you know, the British Empire and the Pakistani, and then Bangladesh or the Bengali. So these are the, you know, the rulers. And here, if you look at this, this is the coloniality, the time. There is no post or it's non-linear. The first one is linear, but this one is not non-linear. And the red arrow here suggests the epistemic journey of not just myself, but my participants both across space and time, from the Chittagong Hill Tracts to Dhaka to Australia. So time doesn't stop here with us, with the Chakmas in Melbourne or in Australia or in Sydney, but intergenerationally, which is passing on to the values, tradition to their children, the next generation in diaspora and in other diasporic Chakmas, which is indicated in this arrow here. All right, so I would like to wrap up by inviting you to consider how these theories can be applied in your own research, regardless of the topic. It's not only about diaspora or subalterns or subalternism, not about ethnic minorities. It could be religious minorities. It could be about women in the patriarchal society. It could be non-Muslims in Muslim countries or Muslims in, you know, like India or in China. It could be about marginalized learners in the classroom, like, you know, ELT classrooms, as well as many of you have here probably. So anything involving some kind of critique of power, these theories can be applied in so many areas. These are some of the questions we need to consider in locating ourselves when we, you know, when we are commencing critical research. Research, as you know, in social sciences is not straightforward. We carry our own biases and we need to acknowledge them. And these questions will probably help us uncover those biases. For example, who are we? That's our epistemology. And what exactly are we researching? The scope, the gaps. what discourses are privileged, what discourses are not privileged, what is known, what is not known, the knowledge limit, and what is our espoused agenda. What are we trying to achieve? We are not neutral. We all have an agenda, and that is our axiology. Okay, so I will wrap up here. So I'm just excited to think about opportunities that I might build with some of you in the audience here. For example, as I mentioned, Sabrina and I are talking about writing a paper, and who knows where it will take us. So research is about, of course, sharing and learning from each other. And I have a very, very long way to go. This is not me telling you what you could do, but having a dialogue, sharing ideas, and you are most welcome to ask questions, but also give suggestions. So I will wrap up here, and thank you very much. If you want to send me an email, this is my email address, or if you want to read my PhD thesis, I don't know if you would want to, I could send you the link, or you could probably wait until next year. I'm hoping that my thesis will be published and turned into a book. Thank you, Sabrina, and thank you, everyone. I'll stop share.
Now we open the floor for questions from the audience, or any comment. I was thinking if you could maybe share some of the participants, sharing with you maybe.
Like what kind of things participants share?
Their experience that you have collected your data.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
prominent experience. You can just share. No slides or nothing. Like just share as a story.
Sure.
How they went to Melbourne, like went from Bangladesh to Melbourne, and how they felt there. Because as I can see that it is a case of double minority.
Mm-hmm.
Minority here and then becoming minority again abroad. Most of my indigenous friends who I met in Australia, Vidhayak Chakma, and then I have Janet Natran and many other indigenous friends, they went to Australia with Aussie scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not known as Bangladeshi.
Yeah.
They're known as Chinese.
Yes. Well, I think in Australia, I wouldn't say it's we are considered as Chinese. It's the term is actually Asian. That's how we are referred to, Asians, because of our Mongolian, Mongoloid features.
And many of the friends got good jobs in, like we look for odd jobs when we are students, right? So they get good jobs in restaurants because they have like features like Chinese people, right? So there are issues, how they feel about it. Some of them are very happy with it. Some of them don't feel good about it. So I would like to hear your participation.
Well, so I'm just sharing my participants' accounts there, what they have told me, right? Okay, so there was a question, actually. I asked them whether they felt discriminated against or they have experienced racism. It's actually one of my findings that I report about racism. So the overall, all 7 participants, the overall message was that no. They haven't experienced racism because they could not, I still remember one said, well, there is racism, very subtle racism here and there, but that's nothing compared to what we experienced in Bangladesh. So that's the message, and it was across all the 7 participants. That's what they said. Yes, there is racism, like in every country, there is, but it not what they have experienced in Bangladesh. So it was incomparable. Yes, Zerinapa.
Yeah. Okay, that's very interesting. I was wondering, maybe I would disagree with Sabrina, coming to Australia, maybe there's less of double colonization because now you're part of a group of immigrants. Does
Yes.
that help? So you feel
Yes.
less, I mean, you probably felt more as you stood out as different in Bangladesh.
Exactly.
The second question, and I'm really interested, I think most of the others here in Bangladesh, you know, we only think that for South Asia, for British Empire, we have to use Bhabha, Spivak, but the fact that you've gone to the Latin Americans, could you tell us a little more about it, why you found that, apart from time, why else you found decolonial was more appropriate or apt?
Yes, I think as I was saying, Appa, it was like when I was reading about, you know, post-colonialism, and particularly after analyzing my data, and the whole post-colonialism, you know, the concept of the theory just wasn't working for me. Because, for example, the participants still carry that sense of, to some extent, you know, some of the participants actually said that, yeah, it's really hard for us to trust the Bengalis. And also when they say Bengalis, they actually refer to the Bengali Muslims. So Bengali is equivalent in Chakma, and we don't call Bengali, we call Bangal. So that is, so my husband is a Bangal. So that is
Bangal or Mama?
Bangal.
Okay.
It's like,
yeah.
Yeah. So, yes, so they, you know, they carry that mistrust still in Australia. And then the, you know, the experiences, it is just inseparable. They carry, you know, those sense of insecurity or just feeling like, and one participant said, sometimes we go to gatherings and I watch what I say. What if, you know, even if because we know if we go to Bangladesh, and sometimes it could be really dangerous for Bideshis, you know, foreigners. So they are here, they're still vigilant. They use the word vigilant. Yes.
Roman sir has a question.
Yes.
Yes, hello. Yes, I was really shocked and angry like you to read that quotation you gave about that lecturer writing called nonsense. Huh? So
exactly.
I'm very sorry for that. I apologize on behalf of all not on behalf of him, all Bangladeshis. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
My next question is, now I understand that NCTB, they have started introducing books for pre-primary and class 1 and class 2 in Chakma language.
Yep.
Now, my question is, who teaches those language? Because most of the people I know, they don't know the Chakma language. So,
well, thank you, Amin Bhai. This was a conversation that I had with Raja Devashish Roy, our Chakma king. And we have a number of trained Chakma Ojapak, that's what we call teachers. So they are being trained, and because it's not, you know, it's only basic levels, only, you know, in primary or pre-primary that are being taught. So there are courses. You can also download, you know, the letters and yes. And I am planning, and it's a shame that I don't know how to read and write. I don't. So I hope I will. You know, I'm hoping when I have some time, but there is so much to do. Yes. So it's just that there is a vacuum. I mean, it is true.
Yeah, there is vacuum. Yeah, there's a vacuum.
Yeah. But
go ahead.
There has been some type of programs that are being, you know, that the teachers are being trained, and the Raja is particularly very focused on training, you know, not only just how to teach, just so that they can actually converse, you know, writing and writing poems. Because when we when we write, we use Bangla.
Yeah, Bangla. Yeah.
Alphabets.
No. Yeah. No. You are involved in this dictionary project, trilingual dictionary project, which will be available hopefully sooner than later.
Yeah.
And I want to use the Chakma script also.
Yes.
So if you know of anybody who knows the Chakma script, we would like to include him or her in that project. Then it will be better. It'll Chakma education. I mean, it will help in the Chakma education. Further, yeah. So that is one of your. It's written in your biodata that you are working for education for Chakma people. So if you could, I don't know many Chakma people. So if you know of any Chakma person who knows the script, and I hope that in 1 year's time, I'll know the script also. Okay.
Thank you, Amin Bhai. Thank you for the initiative.
We have comments in the chat screen, but I'll go back to chat screen later because Habib is waiting for a question.
Habib, yes, please go ahead.
Ma'am, congratulations. It was a very, very stimulating presentation as expected. And I'm fortunate because I saw you prepare and grow as a researcher. And today I know what you have done. So I have a small question. The whole constellation of post-colonial and decolonial theories you have come up with this project are again quite androcentric, and the post-colonial ideas of womankind, race, then empowerment, even ethnicity, they have just become quite a stereotyping and cliched. And don't you think that without having the presence of the female iconoclasm, which can be consisting both of the literary, cultural, activistic, theoretical. So you have talked about the constellation of the theoretical part and which are really very patriarchal. So other than Spivak, we don't see any name of the woman iconoclast. So what can be done in incorporating all those iconoclastic voices of the women who are writing, who are fighting, we have so many figures if we look at our local history. So Moshita Devi, Arundhati Roy. So don't you feel like having being placed them in this desubalternizing constellation? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Habib. Habib was saying that he saw me grow, I guess, as a researcher because Habib was doing his master's from Deakin University in Melbourne, and that's how we have known each other. It's a fantastic question, Habib, and I think definitely, I could have done, of course, there are many ways of using theories in a PhD, but given the time and data and my reading, and as I said, Habib, I think we are all biased towards something, right? And yes, we are biased how we think, and that comes up actually, and that's how you also produce. You write, you think. We can think, we can read. We can try to get rid of our biases, but it is really hard. So I could have used a number of other researchers, definitely, but I was not looking into probably not feminism, but not. I also actually have used Kabir in my thesis. Naila Kabir. Naila Kabir is about empowerment. So it's a fantastic question, Habib, and I think we could even hear some of the ideas from the audience. What do you think? How can we do that to answer Habib's question?
Ma'am, I'm not talking about your project, and if we just look at the holistic culture of our research, there is a huge vacuum regarding regarding utilizing the feminine iconoclasm.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So,
may I add to that? I think I'm speaking from my personal experience. Firstly, thank you, Urmee, for the wonderful presentation. It was so enlightening. I learned a lot today, especially the concept of decoloniality. Back to my personal experience in my classroom, when I asked the minority students to speak up and share their folk stories or folk tales, the stories that come from their backgrounds, share them with us in the class. They do it, but when I tell them to actually write it and publish those stories, there's a hesitancy. I've noticed this because they're struggling with asserting themselves as Bangladeshis in our cultural context. So they're traumatized, I think. That's the question I asked, because there's a sense of trauma in them because they don't feel comfortable sharing their roots, their stories of their folk tales with all of us. So
yes,
there's always this struggle.
Yes, I completely agree. Even I actually didn't know much about the Kaptai Dam before I started my PhD. So this is so huge for the Chittagong Hill Tract, people from the Chittagong Hill Tracts, particularly from Rangamati, but particularly for the Chakma. This is so huge. But you know, Kaptai Dam, Borporong. There is a book now in Bangla, and I think it probably will be translated in English. The Great Exodus. We, for some reason, because the memories are so painful. I mean, you know, more than 100,000 people, mainly Chakma, they had to leave the country and took shelter in India. And many of them are still refugees. They haven't got their citizenship, Indian citizenship. So this is so painful as an experience that I think you are right. Yeah, for a very long time. And even when I was growing up, right? When we were growing up in the 70s and 80s, we would hear about it, but not to an extent that, you know, we would talk about or discuss this. The big, so yeah, I think you're right. So Habib, I was just thinking about your question. Sorry, I probably misunderstood a little bit. We could use, I have come across like Germaine Greer, she's an Australian feminist, and Judith Butler, she works in the area of performativity.
Gender performativity.
Performativity. Some of the words are so difficult to pronounce. Yes, I think I saw Bargi. Hello, Bargi. I think I saw you raised your hand. Is there a question that you would like to ask, Bargi?
Bargi's device is not working. I see a cross sign.
Oh, okay. Right.
Moninur Bhai has a question. So the books are wrongly represented. And is there any resistance from the Chakma community regarding this?
What was the question? Sorry, I need to.
So the Chakma is wrongly represented in the books in Bangladesh. Is there any resistance from Chakma community to this wrongly representation of Chakma identity?
Moninur, what do you mean by resistance here? I'm just wondering.
Thank you, Urmee, Dr. Urmee. Just I mean,
you can call me Bhavi. You call me Bhavi. That's fine.
Yes, Bhavi. Yes. So that's why. Okay, Urmee Bhavi. Just I mean that is there any protest? Because we are the majority community, but in Bangladesh, we are not aware of this sort of situation and this sort of representation of Chakma identity. So we have a right that we have to protest this one, but we are not aware of this sort of situation. That's why I'm asking, I'm wondering, is there any protest from Chakma community to represent it wrongly in the textbooks?
Okay, to my knowledge, I might be wrong though. They're writing about these issues. They're trying to raise awareness. I have seen multiple posts on Facebook and on Twitter. I'm not sure. There is a very young writer that I follow on Facebook. Her name is Chakma. She writes both in English and in Bangla. She's a fantastic writer, and she often writes about misrepresentation, and even, I don't know whether you have read this poem written by a young poet called Shashoto something, where he exoticizes the Chakma women, and just wants to have sex openly with them, things like that. So she wrote about it, how women are exoticized, how women are seen sometimes easy prey, and things like that. So Monino, to answer your question, I don't think there have been any protests or anything, but not like Shahbag protests or something, but it is more like in written form, or particularly in social media. But I think there might be lots of people are writing now. Chakmas are writing. One of them is going to be Dinalo, who is about to start his PhD, who is here. So yes, I think in written form, Moninur, not in Shahbag style.
The book should be withdrawn.
Definitely.
Yeah, because we are believing inclusive society. We are talking about the equity. We are talking about the SDG. We are talking about the human rights, but we are violating those sorts of notions. So we need to protest it, and we need to withdraw. I agree with Amin Rahman. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question here. Is it always the Chakma community that will be protesting against such misrepresentation, or from the majoritarian Bengali groups also should come some protests?
Yeah.
I think it is actually coming, Putul. I know that many, Bengali writers and poets, and people who work with human rights organizations, they write for us, supporting and criticizing and just writing. They have published many of the publications also written by the Bengalis. And we are still trying to, enter into academia. I mean, we have, but not to that extent, and yeah. You can imagine, I mean, academia writing in English, it is really hard for us. It's our third language, so going there, of course, there are, my cousin, who is the, yeah.
The number is very insignificant.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, ma'am, may I?
Yes.
The audience is dwindling, so we have to wrap up soon.
Sure.
Yeah, but because we have students here in the audience as well, so let's ask them, because sometimes our students don't ask anything because they think that their questions will be very silly questions. Actually, they are not sometimes. Yeah. So
not sometimes, and no question is silly. No question is
silly.
No, obviously. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Brac University students, especially they're doing a research methodology with me, ELT students. Do you have any question for ma'am? It doesn't have to be related to theoretical framework that you do not understand. No. It can be any other question. You have any question? Nito, yes. Nito is from a minority community. Nito, could you introduce yourself and your community to us?
Yeah.
Nito? I think network problem.
Okay, in the meantime, I'm just looking at the messages, and I just wanted to acknowledge, as I mentioned, that Kobita Di is here, Kobita Chakma. She is one of those very few, academic writers in English. I started my chapter 1 introduction chapter with Kobita Di's poem that was published when I was in the second year of undergrad at Dhaka University. Joli Nodim Hitte, Banglai Hobe Rukhe Darabona Kano, and English version hotche, both Bangla and English, they are available. English version ta hotche, Why Wouldn't I Flare? Joli Nodim Hitte. It is a fantastic. So Kobita Di, some of my friends have read are reading my thesis because they want to learn about me and my experiences. Runa, who wanted to join here, but she couldn't because of the time difference in the state. So she found out that the poem is so strong, and she didn't know. So we are spreading. There is so it is. We are entering slowly, and hopefully there will be more. Yes. Any questions from Brac and Sabrina students? Sabrina students. Is there a question in the chat?
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. Can I ask?
Nito, please, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
sure.
You can.
Sorry, my video is not working. I don't know what
No
happened.
problem, yes.
Okay. Ma'am, I am Nito Ekka from Diaspora district. It's not part of the Bangladesh. And I belong to the Urao Adivasi community. It's a minority.
Okay.
I am a Christian. And as we live in the Bangladesh, sometimes I feel as ethnic group or minority, sometimes I don't get my clear identity about which tribe or Adivasi or indigenous people I belong to. Sometimes we cannot represent ourselves clearly. As I was studying in Shillong, Meghalaya, I did my degree honors there. Then there they used to call me Adivasi. And those who live in the hill tracts, for them they call tribal people. But in Bangladesh, we don't find that kind of particular things that what identity should be ours, either indigenous or tribal or Adivasi. So this kind of insecurity we feel in Bangladesh. So could you suggest something actually, what will be our identity?
Nito, I had a question. Like total, how many people of your community is there in Bangladesh? Because there are many indigenous communities, as we know, but your community's name is
No.
Yeah, like not
I
heard.
think more than 1 lakh people are there.
More than 1 lakh.
And it mostly north part of Bangladesh, the Rajshahi, Dinajpur, Noga, Bhugra, that side. And some part of in the tea garden also, Silet, Sri Mongol. Some part of the tea garden also, they are living there.
To answer your question, Nito, I don't think I have the answer because of the politics. It's all about politics and political reasons. I think that we are still struggling to be recognized as indigenous or Adivasis, and we don't want to. I don't want to go into details about all these political terms and the fights and how the government is not recognizing and just changing the names from Upajati to Kudro, Niri Goshti. And so to me, Nito, this is how I would say. I know you might think that it is easier because I live abroad, but I would say, Ami Chakma, and who cares? Ke ki daklo amake. Ami mone kori ami Chakma, ami amar Chakma jatite belong kori, ebong amar Chakma ness keu kere nite parbe na. And that's my identity. When I was writing my PhD, as I showed the slide there, I wrote this section about, my identity, and my supervisor said, why are you putting Chakma in the middle or last? You come out so strongly as a Chakma woman. And that's her realization that amar lekhate, amar je Chakma identity, it was so strong that she said, it has to be your Chakma first. You're Australian, you're Bangladeshi, of course, but mainly you are Chakma. And that's how I came, to her, that's how she thought after reading my writing. So, that's how I think. And I spoke to some of my participants as well. And that's what they said, that আমাদের আইডেন্টিটি কেউ কেড়ে নিতে পারবে না, as long as, but it is about recognition. So আমরা যদি ধরো আদিবাসী বা ইন্ডিজিনাস হিসেবে যদি স্বীকৃতি পায় বাংলাদেশে, তাহলে গভর্নমেন্ট কিছু কিছু জিনিস দিতে বাধ্য হবে. So it could be one of the reasons, or it's very political. So yeah.
So Urmee, dear Urmee,
yes,
I'm Tahmina Sovan, Laju. Congratulations to me. Yes, Ahnab Tahmid, my ID is Ahnab Tahmid, but I am Laju Tahmina Sovan. I am hearing, and congratulations to you. And I'm greatly impressed to see you and hear you. And I would like to apologize living in Bangladesh and being Bangladeshi. And I feel regret that you have gone through such a mental trauma. And I really think that we all the Bangladeshis, if change our mindset, and if we belong, that every group has their own identity, and we believe that beauty in diversity. So Bangladesh, yes, we expect that one day, and I also believe that every citizen or the guardians, particularly being a guardian or a teacher in this country, living in this country, I think that we should bring up our children to change this mindset, and then I think the scenario of Bangladesh will be changed. Thank you.
Thank you, Laju. I really appreciate it, and thank you for joining. Shonibare erokom shomoye. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. As parents, that's our responsibility. Teachers have a big responsibility as well. And then this type of books, and these two or one is only one of very few examples that I have shown you. There are so many examples. মানে কি বলবো আর, seriously অনেক এত উল্টা পাল্টা কথা লেখা এবং আজে বাজে কথা লেখা. And the thing that I think needs to change drastically in Bangladesh is that we don't really think about how other people might be affected, the way we talk about them, the way we talk to them, and the way we address them. যেমন আমি বললাম, I mean jokingly, my friends আমাকে যখন বলে যে তুই কি সব দেখতে পাস তোর ছোট চোখ দিয়ে, right? I mean, what was I supposed to do? আমি বললাম যে হ্যাঁ তুই কি জানি দেখি তো মনে হয় সবকিছু, মানে I was so startled, but it was jokingly, and I still remember. I wrote it after I used Kobita this poem. আমরা তখন মানে first year বা second year এ পড়ি, the book came out, and of course জলে নদীম হিকতে, it was written in বাংলা অক্ষর ইউজ করে লেখা. তো আমার এক friend পড়ছিল বইটা because it represented us. It was something that we felt like, yes, this is what we feel, this is how we feel, so strong. It was received by everyone in a very strong way. তো আমার friend আমি দেখাতে নিয়ে গেলাম, এটাও দেখ কিরকম. আমার friend পড়ছিল এবং of course she couldn't pronounce the words, and then she started just laughing. I mean, what am I supposed to do, right? So I just changed the topic to something more common. So these are the experiences, as I was saying, if I know as women we go through different types of experiences, right? আমরা জানি আমাদের experience কিরকম মেয়েরা বাংলাদেশের সোসাইটিতে, but যখন আমরা Chakma হিসেবে বা নট অনলি চাকমা, মারমা হোক, ত্রিপুরা হোক, বাট একটা সময় ছিল দ্য ইউনিভার্সিটি সময়ে, কারণ মানুষরা শুধু চাকমাদেরকে চিনত, অন্য অন্য কোনো বাকি জাতিদের চিনত না, শুধু চাকমাদের চিনত। এই জন্য সবাইকে চাকমা 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 করে ডাকতো, এবং চাকমা ওয়াজ লাইক সো মাচ ফান টু দেম। আমি রিক্সায় যতবারই ইউনিভার্সিটিতে যাবো আমি শুনবই, মানে উইদাউট এনি এক্সেপশন আমি শুনবই এই ডাক, ওই চাকমা, ওই চিঙ্কু, ওই চাইনিজ, I mean, you know, and at some point you just get used to it and you just say, yeah, this is how my life is going to be. You know, I will have to live in this country. So that's what I'm saying. So jara chele, Muslim chele, you know, tara mone hoy na konodin ei somosto jinish experience korche. The other thing, just to bring the question to Sabrina, dekho, যখন আমরা অস্ট্রেলিয়াতে আসি, that is for the first time probably for Bengalis, that they feel like, you know, minority, right? Because এখানে suddenly, you know, আমাদের মতো লোকজন বেশি। And Zerina আপা যেটা বললেন যে it's true, I don't really feel like a minority in Australia because আমি চারপাশে দেখি, ক্যাম্পাসে যাই, ওখানে দেখি সবখানে আমার মতো মানুষ এখানে বেশি compared to তোমার মতো মানুষ। I'm, you know, dividing, but just to represent আর কি। So we don't really feel double minoritized here in that way.
Sabrina, আমি একটু অ্যাড করতে যাচ্ছি, is that all right? I'll just
Yes.
take 30 seconds maybe. একটা আমার অভিজ্ঞতা হচ্ছে যে বাংলাদেশে একটা কোয়েশ্চেন আমাকে প্রায় করে যখন মানুষ জানে যে আমি অস্ট্রেলিয়ায় থাকি, সেটা হচ্ছে এই অস্ট্রেলিয়া নাকি খুব রেসিস্ট এরকম। আমি বলি হ্যাঁ, আমার উত্তর হচ্ছে এরকম, হ্যাঁ খুবই রেসিস্ট, কিন্তু বাংলাদেশের চেয়ে অনেক কম। এটা শুনে ওরা একটু থতমত খেয়ে যায়। And then I have to explain যে আমরা তুই তুকারি করি, আমাদের ইউ প্রোনাউনটার মধ্যেও তিনটা আছে, আপনি আমি তুই। বুয়াদেরকে আমরা বুয়া বলে ডাকি as if they don't have any name. রবিনসন ক্রুজো যেমন ফ্রাইডের নাম দিয়েছিল ফ্রাইডে উইদাউট ইভেন আস্কিং, বদারিং টু আস্ক তার কোনো নাম আছে কিনা। রিক্সাওয়ালাদেরকে তুই করে বলি, এটসেট্রা এটসেট্রা। সো আমার উত্তরটা হয় এই যে আছে রেসিজম জাস্ট লাইক এভরিওয়্যার এলস, কিন্তু বাংলাদেশের চেয়ে কম। এবং when we talk about racism here, of course, I'm not referring to races or ethnicities, I'm talking about socioeconomic classes and all that. আপনি আমি তুমি যেখান থেকে আসে, things like that. So Zerina আপা কিন্তু এই কথাটাই বললেন যে in many ways উর্মি হয়তো felt much more liberated coming to Australia. Yes, আমার ক্ষেত্রে কিন্তু উল্টো। আমার এক্সপিরিয়েন্স হচ্ছে as a Bengali Muslim and as a man living in patriarchal society, Muslim society Bangladeshe, আমার জন্য কিন্তু it was different. I felt more like a minority. Urmee কিন্তু she didn't feel like that in Australia. ওর কাছে ছিল it's such a different experience for both of us having grown in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Okay, because we are running out of time, and any last comment from the audience, please? Let's look at the chat screen maybe. Yeah. Yes, Arman is asking me in direct message that the video recording will be available or not. I will be recording it, but I need email address to send. So you have to send me your email address so that I can send to you. So it's being recorded. And I would request Rakib sir to have, you know, like if you have any other comments for Urmee ma'am as a life partner. It is a big journey for Urmee ma'am because I know how she struggled as a mother with twins, and it is an emotional journey, I would say, because she could have started her PhD long before, but she sacrificed, and I can see her, she's getting emotional now. She sacrificed years of her life for her daughters, and now at this point we can see Dr. Rakib Chaudhary and Dr. Urmee Chakma. Urmee Chakma, because of her own identity, not being wife of Dr. Rakib Chaudhary at all. She is Dr. Urmee Chakma. So any last comment from your side, sir?
Thank you, Sabrina. আমার খুব বেশি অ্যাড করার নেই. I just wanted to say that Urmee যেটা শুরুতে বলেছিল যে she is seeing it as a privilege, and she recognizes that she's a minority, but she has been privileged, and so am I. আমি আমাকেও যখন as a success story হিসেবে আমাকে কোথাও showcase করতে চায়, I think তোমার ইন্টারভিউতে আমি এই কথাটা বলেছিলাম, I think a couple of months ago, যে I don't see it as a matter of pride having done what I have done, whatever that is. I see it as a privilege. যে privilege অনেকের নেই. I've been able to do a few things because I've had that privilege. And one way of seeing it is to see it from the socioeconomic point of view. ওই দিক থেকে privilege, fine. Or having had the opportunity to come to Australia on a scholarship, fine. But there are also other privileges that I was born into, because I was born in Bangladesh as a Bengali in a Muslim family, and then I was a man. So, being a man in a patriarchal society, in a Muslim majority society, being a Muslim automatically gives me that privilege, which I can only understand or kind of know the implications of once I'm removed from that system. In other words, when I leave Bangladesh. Now, I have spent more than half of my life outside Bangladesh, and not just in Australia. My childhood, a big chunk of my childhood was also outside Australia. So, a affiliationটা আছে দেশের সাথে. আমি বাংলাদেশি, আমি বাঙালি, of course, আমি কিন্তু অস্ট্রেলিয়ান, এবং আমার মধ্যে ওই ধরনের গিল্ট কাজ করে না. If I see in many ways I can associate myself more as an Aussie and less as a Bangladeshi. কিছু কিছু দিক থেকে, সব দিক থেকে কিন্তু না. Because I know that citizenship or affiliation to social structures, classificatory system, Urmee যেগুলোর কথা বললো, ethnic identification, racial identification, religious identification, all of these things are constructs. এই জিনিসগুলো হচ্ছে কোনোটাই ন্যাচারাল না, এগুলো সব কিন্তু a range of discourses make these things happen, and then we have to subscribe to them. So এখানে তোমরা যারা আছো, শিক্ষার্থী যারা, সাবরিনার ছাত্র ছাত্রীরা অনেকে আছো এখানে, অনেকে গবেষণা করছো, সাবরিনার কলিগরা আছে এখানে, আমিন ভাই আছেন, আমার পিএইচডি স্টুডেন্ট আছে, ইনফ্যাক্ট 2 জন এখানে বিদেশ থেকে, মনিনুর আছে, আমার পিএইচডি স্টুডেন্ট ছিল, আমার বন্ধুরা আছে, বিল্লাল আছে, বন্যা আছে, মুহিব আছে, আমার ক্যাডেট কলেজের বন্ধু, আমরা একসাথে পড়েছি। সবাইকে আমি এটাই বলছি যে একাডেমিক হিসেবে কিন্তু আমাদের একটা আলাদা দায়িত্ব এসে পড়ে। As scholars, we have the added responsibility to look beyond the discourses and the social structures that we are located within, just by virtue of having been born with a particular skin color or an ethnicity or a religion imposed upon us through our family. We have to look beyond that. It becomes an ethical responsibility for us to look beyond these when we do research. Now, Urmeeর রিসার্চটা ছিল মাইনরিটিদেরকে নিয়ে। হ্যাঁ, এখানে যারা আছেন অনেকের রিসার্চ কিন্তু it may be about pedagogy, it might be about TESOL, ELT, applied linguistics, literary research, it doesn't matter. I think the autoethnographic element in Urmee's research, which is about knowing about yourself, looking at your epistemologies, all of these things, these can equally be applied in your research, whatever your topic is. And Sabrina এক জায়গায় বলছিল চ্যাটে যে স্টুডেন্টদেরকে যে এই জায়গাটা তোমাদের থিসিসে লিখতে হচ্ছে, এই জায়গাটা একটু খেয়াল করো। So তোমাদের সবাইকে বলছি যে being aware of how you're located within the intersection of multiple discourses, and কেন তোমরা কোনো একটা বিষয় কোনোভাবে নির্দিষ্টভাবে চিন্তা করছো, not because you truly believe in that, but because of the ideologies that have been fed to you through the system, including formal education, classroom যে এই ধরনের কথা বলা হচ্ছে, continental literature, third world literature, এই ধরনের, অথবা things that come to you through the media. You have to look beyond that. And that is when you can be a truly ethical researcher, regardless of what your topic is. It doesn't have to be about critical theories. It could be about ELT or pedagogy or classroom teaching and learning. So আমি এটা বলেই শেষ করব যে I think for me the takeaway lesson from Urmee's presentation, and thanks to Sabrina for hosting this absolutely, is that we need to know ourselves. I know it sounds like a cliche, but we need to know ourselves at the epistemological level in order to be ethical researchers. Thank you so much, Sabrina.
Urmee ma'am, so we would like to end the webinar. If you want to say any last comments.
Well, Sabrina, I just wanted to say thank you very much. I was actually looking forward to it because, you know, I felt like I have learned about me so much and learned about Chakmas so much through my PhD, and I couldn't wait to share. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you everyone for coming and joining and cheering me, and all the support, all the comments. I wasn't able to answer all of them, but I was just having a look and going through. I can't believe that friends from Muhib Rashid, he's in Canada, joined here, and I know Kobita Di had a very long day. She had guests at home, and Kobita Di ইয়েও করছে যে একটা ফিল্ম কম্পিটিশন হচ্ছে ওখানে উনি ইয়ে করছেন জাজ ওখানে, and Lipi, Aisha Siddiq, and everyone who joined. I also saw Bonnie was here as well. I didn't know Bonnie came. Truly, I can see Nilima, everyone. Thank you so much. It really, you know, and Bonna, Chat Sultana. Jodio, I can't see your face, your beautiful face, dosto. So, oh,
No, she's actually at her dentist's at the moment. Bonna.
Oh, okay.
I am the dentist.
মানে support কাকে বলে, I know support. দিনালো এত ভরে উঠে, you know. Thank
এখানে বিল্লাল আছে, নীলিমা
don't forget to mention Noyon Isrokfar.
Noyon is here as well.
Noyon is here as well.
I shared you to 94. It came from Pompey, in fact.
Okay.
Thanks to Pompey.
Sharok, okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Urmee ma'am, we look forward to having more presentations in like not in Brac but Bangladesh. You have to we look forward to sharing from your side, because research and knowledge is not really shared in Bangladeshi context, you know. So nowadays we have Zoom, and this pandemic has become easy for us to, you know, share our knowledge. So we look forward to having more of your presentations in various platforms. Yeah. So sure. I would like to thank everyone, because it's Azan going on just beside my house, and it's loud. So thank you for joining. And the recordings I can provide. If you give the email address in the chat screen, I will provide the recordings to you. So we end the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.